Good morning. I am going to read you a story in a little bit, but until people show up, I'm just going to riff a little bit on how I am able to write the stories that I write as quickly as I write them. A lot of you know that I am the author of close to 800 short stories now, and I write several of them every week. Um, so for me, it all begins with a process. A lot of authors talk about whether they are pantsers or plotters, and I would say that I'm neither. I am, I guess, what's best described as a structuralist. Um, there are basically only 12 human stories called archetypes. Um, you've heard maybe concepts like overcoming the monster or hero's journey, etc. Um, so there's 12 archetypes, and there are tons of genres, but there's basically 12 core genres that can be mixed and matched. And there are uh, 7 or 8 story shapes, depending on who you ask. I typically go with 8. Well, if you layer the genre and the archetype and the story shape, you end up with um, a series of things that must happen in a certain order in order to create a story. Um, that is to say that you can't flip flop the order and still have the same genre or the same archetype, etc. And so when you overlap them, sometimes you've got things that you can uh, use for both or all 3 pieces of the story. Um, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to have an additional beat in the story, an additional scene in the story, or part or chapter or what have you, um, to fulfill the promises made by the archetype or the genre or the shape that you're dealing with. Now, there's a myriad of hybrids. You could have a overcoming the monster story along with the hero's journey, for example. Um, but if we're talking just strictly one archetype, one genre, and one shape, you end up with 2,304 different options. Um, Once you start mixing and matching them, you end up with mixing and matching and making hybrids of them. You end up with a quadrillion or 4 quadrillion different story options. Um, but the interesting thing is because there are certain things that people expect from genre and from archetype and from um, shape, they know, even if they don't understand story, they know inherently if a story is getting it right or getting it wrong. Um, so if you start from that structure, things become a lot easier. You know that certain things have to happen in a certain order. You know that instinctively in your brain because it's how you've learned story from the time you were very, very small. So an author who's cognizant of that can use that to very quickly create a story from a blank page, which I don't know. I think that's kind of cool stuff. The For me, what it means is I can layer those things pretty quickly and have a really good idea from randomly selecting 1 or 2 or 3 of each and slamming them together. I can very, very quickly come to a point of um, knowing where a story is going to go. And this is before I even add characters or desires or scope or setting or any of those kinds of things. Um, so before I even choose those things, I already have a pretty good idea in a matter of minutes where a story is going to go from a blank page. And then because I operate on a rule that every single character has the absolute right to be 100% themselves, um, what that means is every character that I throw into a unique situation creates a different story. Um, because they're going to respond differently to whatever the stimuli are. Um, so the way I'm able to write these stories so quickly is that I start from that structure. Um, so, for example, if I build the skeleton of a cat, I know it's going to be a cat, and I'm not going to waste a bunch of time trying to put a giraffe neck on it. Um, the and there's so many different variations of cat that it's still an enjoyable cat. I mean, cats own the internet, right? So, anyhow, with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and read you a story that I wrote precisely that way, and it's called The Director. The Director. There's a kid in every group that runs the show. Not the bossy kind. Well, a little the bossy kind. But that's not the whole of it. I mean the kid who makes things happen. The organizer. The one who says, all right, here's what we're going to do. And then a game exists where a minute ago it was just a bunch of kids standing around eating paste. That kid turns nothing into something. And that's a gift. I know it's a gift because I had it. And I've spent my whole life since watching people who don't have it stand around waiting for somebody like me to show up and tell them what the game is. That was me, the director. Recess didn't start until I got there and announced what recess was going to be. Kickball happened because I made the teams. The whole social architecture of the second grade ran through one loud kid with a plan, and that kid was me, and I loved it. I loved it more than any candy. I loved standing in the middle of a thing I built out of thin air, watching everybody play inside it. There's a girl, because of course there is. There's always a girl, right? This girl's name was Priscilla. Probably still is. I have decided in the executive way that I decide everything, that Priscilla and I are the two main characters of the second grade. Mind you, I didn't ask her. Directors don't ask. I just knew it the way I knew what the game was going to be. I built the whole world accordingly. So one day I announced the biggest production of my budding directorial career. We're going to have a wedding. Now this was a real undertaking. This is not kickball. I threw everything into it. There's going to be a ceremony under a big slide, which I'd zone as the chapel. There's flowers, which is dandelions, which I put a kid on picking. There's a fella to say the words, which is Gilbert, because Gilbert had a serious face, and he could be trusted not to laugh. There's a whole procession I choreographed. I cast the thing like a Broadway show. You're the flower girl. You're holding the door. You two are the guests, and you got to clap when I say. I built a wedding out of dandelions and recess and pure force of will, and it was, I say this with real pride even now, magnificent. And I cast myself as the groom. Naturally, I'm the director. And I cast Priscilla as my bride. And I was so deep in it. You got to understand how deep a director gets. I was running the whole apparatus. I was doing the flowers and the procession and cueing Gilbert and telling the guests when to clap. I was so far down in the machinery of the thing I built, I never once, not one single time, looked up at the actual face of the actual girl I had cast as my bride. Because if I had looked up even once from the clipboard in my head, I'd have seen what everybody standing is still long enough to see it. What Priscilla did not want to marry the groom. Priscilla wanted to marry Gilbert. Now, Gilbert, the fella with a serious face, the one I picked to say the words because he was reliable and wouldn't laugh. I had, in my capacity as director, personally placed the boy she liked at the front of the chapel in a position of solemn authority and dressed the whole moment up as beautiful as I could make it, and I had cast myself across from her as the man she had pretended to marry while looking the entire time at the one saying the vows. Everybody saw it. That's the thing about the director. You're so busy running the show that you're the last one in the building to know what the show's really about. The guests saw it. The flower girl saw it. Gilbert, God help him, serious faced Gilbert saw it and did not know what to do with his hands. The only person on that whole blacktop who didn't see it was the fellow who built the thing, because he is too busy not looking up. And the ceremony happens. I run it beautiful. I cue the procession. I cue the clapping. I have Gilbert say the words I wrote. I'm standing there next to Priscilla just glowing, thinking I've produced the finest event in the history of second grade. And I have. That's the sick joke of it. I did produce it. It was gorgeous. I turned to look at my bride at the big moment. Finally, I look up. She's looking at Gilbert. And I have staged it so well. That's the part that got me. I made the moment so pretty. I lit it so good. I built such a perfect little chapel under that slide. And when I finally looked up for my own production, I had a flawless front row close-up view of the girl I loved, gazing past me at somebody else at a wedding I had directed, that I had cast, in a role I wrote for myself. I built the exact machine that showed me the one thing I did not want to see, and I built it too good to look away from. I did not cry. A director does not cry at his own premiere. I finished the show. I cued the recessional. I clapped when the guests clapped and the recess ended, and I walked inside and did not announce a game for a good long while after that, which everybody noticed because recess had a way of not starting when the director went quiet. The gift and the wound were the same thing, see? Same as always. Being the one who runs the show is exactly what kept me from seeing I wasn't the show I thought I was in. If I'd been any less good at building it, I'd have looked up sooner. The talent was blindfolded. I told you that story to tell you this one. Priscilla married Gilbert in real life. I want you to know that. Serious-faced Gilbert grew up serious and reliable, and she married him at 24, and I was not invited to the wedding, which was correct. I married a woman named Julie, and Julie is not a woman you direct. That's the first thing I found out about her, and it's the best. I met Julie at 30. I tried. God forgive me. The defect runs deep. I tried to run our first few dates like productions. I had the plan, the reservation. I had the whole evening cast and blocked. And Julie sat across from me about 20 minutes into date 2. And she put her fork down and she said, "You know, you don't have to produce this. I already showed up." Nobody had ever said that to a director. It had never once occurred to me that a person might just come to the thing on their own without being cast in it. That she was there because she wanted to be, and not because I'd built a world elaborate enough to hold her. We've been married 12 years, and here's what Julie does, and it is the great mercy of my life. She lets me run the show. She does. Vacations, dinners, the whole social architecture of our life still runs through one loud man with a plan. Because you can't retire a gift like that. She likes the games I build. She genuinely does. But every so often, and she got a sense for exactly when, she'll reach across whatever I'm producing, and she'll put her hand on my arm, and she'll say 2 words. Look up. That's it. Look up. It means stop running the show for 1 second and look at the girl you cast as the bride. And I do look up. And every single time, 12 years running, she's already looking back at me, not past me, at me, which is a thing I did not know a bride could do on account of the last time I looked up at a wedding I built. The bride was looking clean over my shoulder at Gilbert. You can't make somebody be your friend, they tell you, and you sure can't cast somebody as your bride and direct them into loving you. That's true. I proved it thoroughly under a slide in front of everybody at the finest wedding the second grade ever saw. All the production in the world won't make her look at you. But every so often, if you're lucky, there's one who shows up on her own, uncast, unstaged, and sits down at the thing you built. And when you finally remember to look up from building it, there she is. I've been looking up ever since. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this, be sure to check me out on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, on Amazon Music. On Amazon, we've got a number of short story anthologies available on Kindle. Look me up on Substack and all the social media places to find me from there. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.